I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. We have a special guest joining us in the studio today. Matthew Garrison is here. Matthew,
Hi.
I'll reach across, shake your hand.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Bassist extraordinaire, sideman,
I try.
composer, club owner, solo artist, educator. Boy, the list goes on and on.
I don't know what the hell I was thinking.
Well, it had to start with your background.
Yeah.
Your father was bass player for John Coltrane.
Yes.
Your mother is a choreographer and dancer.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up in an artistic household like that?
Incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, also pretty wild, you know.
Sure.
I have some trauma from back in the day, but that was also the 70s, so it's, you know, it's excusable.
Sure.
But you know, it was I grew up in New York in Soho, and again in the 70s when it was a period of some really heavy experimentation from an artistic standpoint. And my earliest memories are, you know, seeing live modern dance and crazy avant-garde artists participating and collaborating, and some of the first laser shows and experimental audio techniques, and we all had this happening in the house that I lived in. So
Wow.
yeah, it was incredible. I completely remember just about everything up, you know, I guess from the point where it started making sense. And yeah, it was New York at the time was just popping.
Right.
Still is, but you know,
Of
in
course.
a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you grew up in Italy,
Yeah.
came back to New York, and lived
Yeah.
with your godfather. Who's your godfather?
Jack DeJohnette.
Yeah, and what did you learn during the time you were staying with him?
Well, you know, when I first got, I first started playing bass when I was about 15, and this was in Italy. And I had to leave the country because I was about to turn 18, and the Italian government asked me, okay, would you like to become a citizen? I was like, oh, sure. Okay, so we want you to do at least 1 year of military service.
Okay.
And at that point, I had to make a decision. Okay, am I going to be an Italian citizen and join the military, or am I going to move back to the States? So we called Jack DeJohnette up, who earlier on, when my father had passed on, he offered to help, you know, my mother if she needed some help. And it came to that point, so we called him up, and he's like, okay, come on up to Woodstock. And I lived with his family for about a year.
Wow.
And as I was saying, I started playing bass when I was 15. I was just kind of tinkering with it. But by the time I got to Jack's house, you know, he made it pretty clear what my lineage was in terms of the, you know, the music history that came before me. I was also, you know, regarding my mother's work and all the work she had done at the Loft in Soho.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, you should play music. I'm like, yeah, but no, you should play music, okay? So check this record out. Check this one out, check this out. In a few weeks, come down to the basement with me because he had his studio down there, and we'll start going through stuff. And so for, I guess, the year that I lived there, Jack was everything for me in terms of reference and guidance, and, you know, it was incredible. It was one of the most important musical periods in my life, for sure.
Absolutely. What a
Yeah.
great way to get started.
Yeah.
In that kind of an environment,
Yeah.
with that kind of a mentor, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
And you went from there to Berklee.
Yeah, Jack helped me out to, you know, acquire a scholarship. You know, one of his signatures kind of helped the thing, and I could already play a little bit, you know, the information that he'd given me. And I went on to Berklee, and I was up in Boston for about 2 years, and the first year was pretty difficult because I had to kind of synthesize all the information and get it together. But I took the summer off after the first 2 semesters at Berklee, and really just I went straight into just trying to get all that information crammed into my head. And by the second year that I started, so in the fall semester, I basically started doing everything at the school. So they'd send me overseas, I'd be on all the bigger events, and that's where things really just kind of took off, you know. So first year was learning, second year was, okay, now we get to work.
Right.
That had a little bit of an adverse effect on my educational side because I started working so much outside the school that I really couldn't continue at the school anymore. So, but I guess in a way that was good because it just kind of propelled me straight into the, you know,
Right.
professional work.
Right. Certainly launched your career.
Yeah.
And since then, Joe Zawinul, Herbie
Yeah.
Hancock,
Yeah.
Mike Stern, John
Yeah.
McLaughlin, Robbie Coltrane, Jack DeJohnette. You've been playing recently with those two guys, right?
Yeah, a lot of touring.
Yeah.
We just released a record called In Movement on ECM. It's the first recording I've ever done with ECM, and it was incredible. Working with Manfred Eicher, I'm sure you know
Sure.
the works that he's put together. Pat Metheny's first record, what was it, Bright Size Life? That's Manfred
Right,
Eicher,
right.
ECM, and Keith Jarrett, and just you name it. There's just about everything that has any historical importance. His name has been in there somewhere.
That's right.
So it was an honor to be in that project, and it's of course amazing working with essentially my brother Robbie Coltrane, who's his father and my father worked together, and we kind of grew up both without dads, so we have this kind of kinship with in terms of our historical references. And then of course Jack was sort of our collective father,
Right.
He just brought us, okay guys, we're gonna play music. You're playing music and you're playing music. And that's how it's gonna go. Yes, sir. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. And you also played recently with Human Elements. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, Human Element. That's the percussionist in the band was the percussionist in Joe Zawinul's project called the Zawinul Syndicate, and we immediately came together. It was just there was something very special. So from that day forth, actually, Arto Tunçboyachian is his name. He's probably the most unknown and most underrated artist, if you ask me, on the planet, because what he brings to the table is just mind-boggling. Not just in his musical and his technical ability, but just conceptually what he's doing. So I have a very strong kinship with him, and he's on every record that I've made of my own, just my own solo records. Then of course there's Scott Kinsey, who I went to Berklee with, and Scott actually was in a band called Tribal Tech. I don't know if you know.
Sure, absolutely.
And Scott is from another planet as well. There's very few people that do exactly what he does, because he approaches playing a synthesizer as an absolutely unique instrument. It's not just a piano player playing a keyboard. He actually gets into these instruments and really figures out things that really very few people have done. In fact, he was towards the later years of Joe Zawinul's life, he was the programmer for all of Joe's sounds. A lot of people don't know that, but
Right.
he was the guy behind the scenes.
Yeah, very cool.
And then the other element in Human Element is Gary Novak.
Right, on drums.
Yeah, so Gary, Alanis Morissette for many, many years.
Lots of credits.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of the LA music, studio scene. He's just about every movie you watch, he's the drummer.
Right.
And then, of course, his work with Chick Corea. So yeah, that band is, for me, in terms of the projects I'm completely dedicated to, just anytime it can happen is with Jack and Ravi, and then Human Element. Those are my two things that go home and play music with the guys and
Right.
the
Right.
family members kind of.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's
Yeah,
incredible.
Human Element is a beautiful band.
Yeah. So you took a slight detour over to the pop world.
Yeah.
And toured with Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Oh, that came about. It was a period of time where I was actually teaching at Berklee. I taught at Berklee from 2005 to 2008. In 2008, I got a call from an artist in Italy. His name is Pino Daniele. Now, most people here don't know who he is at all,
Right.
but Pino created a certain texture in Italian music that just did not exist, where he basically fused jazz and funk from, American traditional kind of, textures. And he fused that with traditional music from Naples. Now, traditional music from Naples has an interesting connection to North Africa, and of course Italian, and then Mediterranean. So it's a sound that really is, it's hard to describe. But so some of his first records involved Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Alphonso Johnson, Steve Gadd. So, he was really kind of pushing boundaries where other musicians from Italy just didn't exist.
Right.
So what was happening at the end of my work at Berklee, Pino called me, and I went to Italy to tour with him. the first show I did with Pino was in Naples. It's the main square in Naples. It's called anyway, the main square in Naples, 70,000 people.
Wow.
That's the kind of shows he does, right? So that, in reality, that was more of my first thing into the pop. That was my first foray. I mean, I'd done other things, but that was kind of the real big arena stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And while I was touring with him, at one point he was looking for a drummer, and I gave him a few suggestions, but then we settled on a really wonderful drummer named Mike Baker. And Mike just happened to live in Italy, so it was even more convenient. I also kind of moved to Italy in that period because I worked with Pino for about 2 years. And then Mike started playing with us in the second year, and Mike was also Whitney Houston's music director for the last 18 years. So, you know, they hadn't been working because of Whitney had been kind of in and out of performing.
Sure.
So, on one of these situations where me and Mike were driving to a performance to play with Pino, he gets a call from Whitney's folks. And this is somewhere in southern Italy, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm driving somewhere way down south. And Mike leans over to me. He's like, "Hey, Matt, you want to do a tour with Whitney Houston?" Yeah.
Okay.
And so it happened. So we kind of tapered off the work with Pino, and then Whitney's kind of comeback happened, and you know, all the rehearsals and all the stuff and television stuff. So that started that. Now, the thing for me, you know, I grew up in New York in the 70s, okay, man,
Mm-hmm.
with crazy people. And I like crazy stuff, okay? So it was at a period of time where I could have continued in that direction and done more and more of that, because I started getting calls from other pop people, this and that. It just wasn't my thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like, it's not that, of course it's great to make money, you know, but for me that's not what drives me when it comes to music. So for some really ill-advised reason, I continue to insist on this thing that I'd like to really try the projects that I really want to get into. But, you know, ultimately that has an important, there's something important about that keeps your personal life on message and your personal concepts on message. And somehow those things sort themselves out. And probably the money that you would have made in the pop world actually ends up happening in the jazz world, because in the jazz world, there's a very strong misconception about jazz, and I think a lot of people watching this, the fact that there's no money in jazz does not exist. That's not a concept.
Mm-hmm.
I play in a lot of huge festivals throughout the world, and they're exclusively dedicated to jazz, and it's a profession you can do, but you need to kind of bust your butt to make it work.
Right.
And you have to stay convinced that what you're doing is the right thing. You know, it's like anything else, right? But jazz in particular, it's a tough one because there's a lot of downtime.
Sure.
But when there's uptime, it's the real thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you're also valued as a musician for what you're actually bringing to the table versus just being kind of functional. You know, you're bringing a flavor or a taste, a texture that's yours.
Right.
So that's what I really appreciate about kind of sticking to the jazz world. Although the pop world is quite interesting, it's just not really so much for me.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I would bet then, based on what you just said, that the key to that is really maximizing the return you get from that downtime.
Yeah.
Because when you're gigging.
Right.
But what happens during that downtime to help your career?
Now I'm glad you brought that point up, because this is where that music venue came into place, right? Because it was that transitional period. Okay, am I gonna not do pop, and am I gonna continue in this jazz world? It might be difficult, and there's gonna be some downtime waiting. So one of the main things that I would normally do is that when there's downtime, I create projects of my own, and that usually materializes into recordings and
Solo albums. And those kind of things,
exactly. I did start seeing the touring trend kind of getting a little iffy in either one of the domains, pop, R&B, whatever it is. A lot of musicians complaining. Europe went through some major changes, and I think a lot of the musicians that I know, our main bread and butter was coming from touring Europe, and that was getting a lot harder. Asia, some of the same stuff has been going on. So I said, I met an old high school girlfriend of mine from Italy. She's actually Chinese, and we were boyfriend and girlfriend, when we were like 16, 17.
Right.
And we met again when I was on tour with Whitney, kind of towards the end of me working with Whitney. And, she was kind of in a transition. I was in a transition. We both had a little bit of money to work with. Both of our marriages kind of went down the tubes, unfortunately, sorry to say. And, we talked about it. So what would you like to do? And we were both leaning towards this idea of education. So we started thinking, okay, well, why don't we make a school? Why don't we create a place where people can come and study and learn stuff, like some strange things that we'd like to talk about. And that, so we kind of went with that, and then we started looking for a space, and then we found a space. And as we were kind of getting ready to get into the space thing, we realized that we really didn't have a curriculum.
Right.
So it immediately switched over to, okay, well, I know thousands of musicians. Why don't I just create a performance space? And what we'll do in there, we'll also record, and we'll kind of bring back the 70s scene, but we'll try to bring it up to date, and we'll make it easy for folks to just do what they want to do instead of bugging them and badgering them for, to bring in customers so we can sell tickets.
Right.
Bad move and good move, right? Good move. The type of work that is generated in that space is some of the most incredible music I've ever seen. And I never, it was at a point like in 2010, I didn't go out to see music all the time. I'm getting older. I want to sit there on the porch with my pipe. I actually don't have a pipe. I don't know what I'm saying. Read a newspaper out in the porch, right? So now what I'm immersed in is every single night there's music. And your opportunities to see what's happening in the music scene these days is unbelievable. So I'm seeing, people that really don't have an opportunity to play anywhere because, most venues in New York won't even respond to them. We do. And we say, come and play your stuff. Come and present your latest, greatest. And when we make sure that they're not so concerned about the audience part. We just want them to present their art to the best of their ability. And when they do show up and they do present this incredible stuff, and 3 people show up in a space that fits 200 per set,
Right.
Of course it gets difficult. So then the next conversation is, folks, your music is incredible. You got to focus on how you can get people out to see you because they need to see you. So we'll work together on this. And so what we're doing is we're continuously collaborating with all these different artists and helping them build up what they want to, their thing. And I must say, some of the projects have gone on to do incredible things.
Nice.
I think, one of the first things that we did, actually the very first video shoot we did there was with Snarky Puppy. Talk about millions of YouTube hits.
Yeah, right.
I mean, from the one shoot that they did at our place, it was a million plus views, which just put us immediately on the map. And now we have all these bands coming in that want to reproduce what they did. And so, but that's just been like kind of one after the other. There's always a newer project of some young folks that are just playing things that your head just spins. You're like, where the heck where did you just come from?
Right.
And we make sure that they continue to come back and they keep developing their craft and they develop their audiences, and it always works out. So it always pays off.
Nice.
It's hard, but I'd rather see the hard part and build things from, because it's more genuine. It's more honest, it's the real thing.
Right.
Yeah. So that's my downtime answer.
Right. And the venue you're talking about is ShapeShifter Lab.
ShapeShifter Lab.
In Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Park Slope area.
In Park
correct?
Slope, Gowanus also. And
Right.
the venue's named after my second recording, which was named ShapeShifter. And the lab component came in, we just kind of put it up on Facebook. We put several names for people to choose from, and everybody went for ShapeShifter Lab. And I think the idea of the name of the record was, the idea was there's me on the cover and it's split in half, and one is kind of the inverse, black and white. You know, my mother's white, my father's black, there's that component, but then there's, are you really seeing what you're seeing? And are you really hearing what you're hearing? And do things need to always be taken at face value? You know, why can't it be something else? You know, you're going to have to open this up and read a little deeper to understand what this person represents.
Right.
And I think that's what ShapeShifter Lab represents. Is it what it is, or is it something else?
You have to go and see her.
We got to go and see what's going on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you brought a couple of beautiful basses here.
Absolutely.
And you are associated with Fodera.
Yeah.
Tell us how you connected with the company, and tell us about these basses.
I connected with Fodera close to 25 years ago, quarter of a century.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was at the time I was playing with Joe Zawinul's the Syndicate, and a woman named Danette Albetta approached me after one of the shows. Danette, by the way, is Berklee manager now, and she also managed Anthony Jackson for quite a long time. She helped me out with some management details for a while. But anyway, she came up to me and she's like, have you ever played it Fodera? I'm like, no. It's like, well, yeah, you should. One of those again. Right. Yeah, you should. So why don't you come down to the shop and you know, just play a couple of basses, see what you think, and everything works out, you're probably going to get a bass. So I did, and I remember they handed me one of the instruments, and I was just kind of an open, empty book. And what Jason said actually during the presentation earlier is one of the main things about Fodera is the neck, right? So obviously the fretboard and how your fingers fall, and then of course all that other stuff is critical. But as soon as you put your hand on that neck and you feel just the way the balance of that neck, it's done. Mm-hmm. All bets are off. It's like you did whatever first thing you've ever done, and it just clunk. There it is.
Right.
I mean, that literally for me, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Just feeling that neck, I was like, okay, what do I do?
Right.
Yeah. So the very first instrument was an Imperial, and the one modification we made is I think the horn on the instruments tended to kind of slope downwards, and you know, I'm a dude. So I wanted to slope upwards. Terrible. So really sorry to say that, but I just needed that look.
Right.
And they're like, okay, fine, put the horn upwards.
Mm-hmm.
And there it is. And sort of, it's an interesting thing. I think we also did some additional there was a little bit of a deeper cutaway, and then it was a 24 fret or 26 fret, the very first one. And you know, so I played that for maybe 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. And then we started talking about a second version because a bass player named Lincoln Goins had a 30, that, by the way, that was a 34-inch scale instrument, and Lincoln Goins was 33. And I figured I'm also a smaller dude, mm-hmm. So I don't need all that reach. And it was, the first instrument is incredible. Second one was a little bit more compact, and it was just right there. So we went with that, and actually at that point we also made the establishment that we established that it should probably be a signature series because it was getting kind of specific, you know, mm-hmm. to what the needs. There's all these other little things that we did on there too, and so yeah, but that, you know, this has been probably one of the I tell the guys quite often at Fodera, I was like, guys, I don't think you really realize how much you've changed my life, and I really mean that because, you know, obviously just the instrument itself and what you can get to with it, you know, without worrying about the instrument. You know, you just play and it does what it's supposed to do. And then there's obviously the other components where, you know, you have this legacy connection to all the other artists that play in Fodera. So, right. You know, Anthony Jackson and Victor Wooten and even Marcus Miller had, I remember there was a bass that Marcus played, a fretless bass that I got to play a few times, is just incredible. James Genus, and this list of incredible artists. So now you're associated with these amazing human beings. So that brings you in a certain space, career-wise.
Right.
So, I mean, really, aside from your own work as a musician, what you need to do every day to kind of make sure you're there, they've literally helped me change the direction of my existence as a human being on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been probably one of the most rewarding experiences I've had with a company, an entity that we sit down and we huddle and we talk about stuff and we come up with these ideas and they do it.
Right.
It kind of reminds me of a piece of software called Ableton.
Sure.
I have some small associations with Ableton, but one thing about Ableton, which I think really launched their success, is that people would just say, hey, what about this? Why don't you put this in there? Why don't you put that? Why don't you try this? And they would do it.
Right.
And it just went berserk, right? Because they listened to everybody, and now you have this incredible piece of software that was just built by this community of human beings. And I think that's critical for any entity, is you have to let people bring something to your table, and you have to let it happen freely, and let them feel as if they're part of that growth. And
Right.
Fodera was a prime example of that for me.
Sure, absolutely.
And I brought that also to ShapeShifter Lab to the best of my ability. I want people to feel like their investment, their time investment, their energy means something,
Right.
And it, you know what I mean.
Right.
So yeah, these basses, most likely Jason will give you a lot more details about every little thing, because these are a little bit new for me.
Sure. Incredible instruments.
Yeah,
Incredible and
absolutely.
gorgeous. Absolutely
yeah.
gorgeous.
Yeah.
Absolutely gorgeous. Matthew, I'm going to wrap up with
Absolutely.
a question I like to ask
Yeah.
when I have a very high-level musician like yourself here, and that is, what makes a great musician?
Perseverance and humility. Because our egos can get blown up very quickly.
Right.
You have a lot of human beings coming to you, adulating you, and you're getting probably more respect than you should sometimes. And I think that people that can keep that, keep the human side and where we come from in perspective, will also help the perseverance side. So that because the perseverance side is, you need to keep on some objectives and you need to work towards those things, and that humility thing can really interfere with the work that needs to be done. So
Right.
don't let all the cool things that happen to you blow up your head. And I'm saying that mostly out of personal experience, because I've done that sometimes. And it's a waste. Just stick with what you need to do to the best of your ability. Work with as many people as you can. Be honest about what you're contributing and what you want back. And just stay human, Keep it simple.
It's interesting, your response and many other responses that I get, there was really no mention of musical things there. There wasn't anything about technique. There wasn't anything about any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, because those things, they happen anyway, And I mean,
They're kind of assumed, I guess.
Yeah, you're going to be as good as you need to be or you want to be.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends. For me, it really comes down to the amount of hours when it comes down to music. How many hours are you going to dedicate to this thing that you're focused on? If it's half the amount that is needed, that's what you're going to get.
Right.
And you'll know how many hours, because if it's not to the point where your brain expects it to be, or where you think others should expect it to be, that's what the result is going to be. So you might as well maximize those hours so that you're not worrying about that thing once you're in the performance. So I think those things just take care of themselves.
Right.
But the more critical things is, how do you handle yourself as a human being as you're progressing through this world, which is quite abstract and not easy to navigate. So humility and perseverance need to be
Those are the keys.
Yeah.
Right. Nice.
Yes.
Nice. Matthew, thanks for being here. We appreciate
Absolutely,
you taking
my
time.
pleasure.
You demonstrated the bases for the sales
Yeah,
engineers this
great.
morning, and what an incredible performance. So we're very grateful to you for spending time
Thank
with
you
us.
so much. I
Appreciate
really
it very much.
Thank you, man.
And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater's Guitars and Gear. Be sure to tune in next time. We'll have more guitars, more amps, more effects, and we'll be making lots of music. I'm Mitch Gallagher.